discussion that is going to follow will explore research that Ambassador Sever and that Jim Clifton spoke of earlier that we believe has the possibilities of establishing a new paradigm for mayors and other civic leaders. The new research instrument, which can measure public opinion in depth in a wide variety of areas, is what is being referred to this morning as Soul of the City. As the panel of moderators, Richard Florida and Frank Newport, will explain, Soul of the City evaluated public attitudes in 14 specific areas, called domains, to establish what the soul of each city is. Each mayor on this panel will discuss a specific domain on which his city scored especially high in the minds of the public. Let me now introduce, if I could, to offer his insights. First, I'm going to introduce Richard first. I had heard about Richard several years ago, and people, knowing that I was involved with Local Forum, said, you've got to meet Richard Florida. He's written some of the most important books on modern thinking and urbanology, etc. And I finally had that opportunity a little less than a year ago, and it has exceeded my greatest expectations. We've had the opportunity to have many, many discussions. I've learned so much from him and developed a fast friendship for which I'm most thankful. He's the author of The Rise of the Creative Class, and most recently, The Flight of the Creative Class, the new global competition for talent. In addition to Professor Florida, we also have Professor Newport, who is the editor-in-chief of the Gallup poll and is in charge of the nation's best-known and longest-running continuous monitor of American public opinion. He's the author of Polling Matters, Why Leaders Must Listen to the Wisdom of People, seen frequently, if not weekly, on CNN. I now turn the floor over to Richard Florida.
Thank you, Tom. It's a pleasure to be with all of you today, and I think this session will open up a conversation about an amazing new tool that Gallup organization in conjunction with the Global Forum, and I've been so fortunate, absolutely fortunate, to be part of this process that Global has brought all of us together. A tool, not just a survey. I think that's important to say. This isn't just a survey, and we'll talk about the survey component, but the idea over time is to create a tool, an automated tool that can be on Mayor Williams or Mayor O'Malley, Mayor Hickenlooper, Mayor Fahey, any of your desk and on your staff's desk, that over time would give you real-time information on how your city is doing, not only against itself, and not only against sister cities in the same country, but against cities all over the world. And you'll hear as we talk, not only this morning, but this afternoon, about the new world poll that our dear friend, my dear friend, Jim Clifton is committed to doing, a commitment to surveying the countries, and we have a city component in that survey, the cities of the world over the course of the next century. As you know, this data doesn't exist. As someone who studied cities for more than 2 decades, you can barely compare systematically Baltimore and Washington, never mind Shanghai and Bangalore and Paris and London. So I think you'll find this tool to be of great interest, and one of the things that we've said internally is we desperately need your help. If we're going to make a tool that works for you and that works for your staff and that is of use, we need your comments, we need your insight, we need your intelligence. I'm going to talk really briefly for about 10 or 15 minutes. I just want to mention some of the overarching themes and really paint a big picture. Then Frank and I will moderate a conversation between the mayors on the stage, and then this afternoon you'll get to see and hear from Warren Wright and others who were involved in the actual construction of this world poll with this cities survey tied to it. And I think our deadline for completing the draft instrument is actually December 31st, so we need your comments and your insight. And I'd just like to thank, there has been an enormous team of people, cities experts at Gallup, at Global, at the World Bank, who've been part of this. Warren Wright, who you'll hear from this afternoon, Darby Miller-Steiger, who's here, Robbie Manchin from Gallup Europe, Tim Campbell, our colleague from the World Bank, and David Wilson, a statistical analyst upstairs, and many people who've been working on this. I want to make 3 points. About 2 weeks ago, I was in this very room, and we heard from a corporate awardee. Gallup hosts a major positive psychology summit, and our honoree that night was Brad Anderson. the CEO of a company called Best Buy. Best Buy, as you may know, has become one of the leading retailer, not just in the United States. We saw from their Chinese and overseas operations. And Brad said something that I've thought about myself a lot, but I've never could articulate quite as clearly as Brad did. And it fits in with Ambassador Severe's comment. He said, it may seem like a time of turmoil and conflict and great tension and difficulty, this age that we're living through. But he said it's a time of great, great hope. Because for the first time in human history, with the rise of, call it information economy and knowledge economy and innovation economy, I like the word creative because every single human being is creative. He said we're living through this change from an industrial age to a creative or knowledge-driven age. And the great hope of our time, the industrial era took our backs and our arms and our legs and our brawn. The creative age holds out the capacity and the promise to link the further development of each and every human being to the further development of our economic societies. That is the great hope, and the question is how we get there. The shift we are going through is enormous. In my view, it's bigger than the shift from an agricultural to an industrial economy. We are moving to an economy where creativity and knowledge are the core sources of economic value. Just in the 40 countries we could document in Flight of the Creative Class, more than 150 million people work in the creative sector of the economy. In an advanced industrial country like the United States or Japan or Belgium, 40 to 45% of the working population work in this knowledge-driven or creative sector of the economy. 50% of all wages and salaries. According to The Economist this week, less than 10% of people in the advanced industrial nations currently work in manufacturing, and our forecasts as this rate of growth and shift from an industrial to a creative age will proceed apace. This is changing not only how we work, I'm sure as Mayor Williams could say, or Mayor O'Malley could say, living in this wonderful creative crescent. It's changing the way we live, what we want in a city, how we manage our time, and how we structure our everyday lives. Well, I've written on that, and I can talk about the creative and knowledge-driven economy forever, but I want to make this much more specific and talk about the role of cities. Tom Friedman, the great New York Times columnist, has written a book which every American has heard about. It's been atop the New York Times bestseller list now since it's been published, and it's making the rounds of discussions about the world. He says the world is flat. He says that advances in technology and trade have allowed us to connect, and he says to his young daughters up in Bethesda, daughters, study hard because there's some young person in China or India who's doing their mathematics and wants to take your job. He says to innovate, you no longer have to emigrate. Well, he's got about half the story right. If the world was flat, we wouldn't have to worry about cities. People would be spread all over the world, and they would live, you know the images, out near a wonderful lake or on a mountaintop and tap into the world economy from their computer. But in fact, cities remain, as Ambassador Severe said, the most important units, these city regions, that you steward and lead and shepherd. The most important economic units, I argue, in my work. That cities have not only replaced the nation state, cities have come to supplant the industrial corporation as the most important social and economic organizing units of our time. The world isn't flat. The world is terribly mountainous, it's terribly peaky, and it's terribly spiky. And the growth centers of the world economy, Ambassador Severe said 20 million. Average size of a city in 1850 was about 350,000 people. Around the year 1900, it was about 1 million. 1950, what was our biggest cities? 5 million? Now they're 20, 30 million, working with colleagues at the Brookings Institution. I know this is going to sound bizarre to you, but we can imagine cities of 50, 75, 80, 100 million people in the next 50 years. If cities could grow from 350,000 to 20 or 30 million, how much can they grow in the next 100 years or so? So cities are the economic organizing unit. Cities are the key factor. What do we know about cities? there is a huge debate going on in the world today about cities. Most people take an economistic view. Most people believe that what a city is a set, actually, they don't even think this. What is a city? In the minds of most people who do economic development in the United States, in Europe, in Asia, in Latin and South America, in Africa, all over the world. It's a location for a business corporation. At best, a city is conceived as a labor market for people. Well, we've begun to outline what a city really does in the Soul of the City survey. We ask not only how a city affects economic welfare, but with Gallup and our colleagues, we ask how a city actually affects a citizen's happiness, or what psychologists and economists call subjective well-being. We ask this across a whole series of domains, and the answers, which we've not shared up to this point with anyone, even for the mayors on this panel who know this stuff down, may seem quite surprising. Of all the domains that we looked at, economics and jobs and personal finances and crime and safety and education, is a city a good place to raise children? Two factors predominate in why a city affects a resident or a citizen's subjective well-being. The first is the aesthetic quality of a city. Now, this may seem shocking to people who take an economistic view of cities and say a city is a location for companies or jobs. But think about how the city affects you. Your sons, your daughters, your children. Think about not what you get from the labor market. Of course you want to have a good job and good finances and have a good way of life for your family. But what does the city give you? Its aesthetic value is the number one rated factor across income, occupation, age, race, ethnicity, and sexual orientation. Cities that value their natural environment, that invest in the quality of their air and their water, that value their history. And one of the interesting things, Robbie's here from Europe, that's coming back in a dialogue with European scholars, is that this aesthetic quality and quality of the built environment in Europe is even more important than the United States. The second factor that people really demand in cities and want and increase their subjective well-being and their happiness is diversity. The question we asked about diversity is your city a good place for racial and ethnic minorities? Is it a good place for families? Is it a good place for entrepreneurs? Is it a good place for young, recent college graduates? Is it a good place for the gay and lesbian population? Cities that scored high on aesthetics and on diversity predominated in the way their people felt, in the happiness of their people. Of course, people needed a good job and to get financial well-being. They needed to have their finances in order. But when you looked at how a city isolated for those factors, aesthetics and diversity predominated. One little note about brain gain, which Jim Clifton said is so important to our work. Looking at these migrations, by the way, migration is the critical factor. It scares me how important it is. Talk about our creative crescent from Baltimore to Washington to Richmond, a magnet for people. I just came back from the city of Detroit. I lived in the city of Pittsburgh for 17 years, cities that have lost and experienced a brain drain. Less than 10% of U.S. metros are brain gain metros, are net importers of highly educated people. That means that 90% are losing. When we asked which group felt the least tolerated, residents, which group faced the biggest burden of tolerance, it wasn't African Americans, it wasn't Hispanics, it wasn't gays and lesbians. It was young, recent college graduates looking for work. And if you think about that for just a minute, you can understand not only the opportunity posed by those groups, I see Mayor Hickenlooper nodding, but the threat perceived to be posed by those groups as they begin to move into a city, change its lifestyle, change its demographics, and change its labor markets. I want to end on one last note, and because Ambassador Sevier said it, I want to echo it. This is a time of great promise, of great hope. of great wealth building, of the rise of this new kind of knowledge-driven creative economy which taps people's intrinsic motivations, creative capabilities, and promises higher economic output and higher GDP and better living standards. But what we are seeing as it unfolds is incredible unevenness and inequality. On the one level, we see this between the brain gain city metros and the brain drain cities and regions. But on the other hand, we see it right within the very mega centers of this knowledge-driven and creative economy. And one of the things I think we can do together, and one of the challenges I would like to pose to the group, is that we not only have to understand how to grow some of the cities represented on this panel. Many of you have been very successful at growing this knowledge-driven creative economy. We also have to understand the tensions and the difficulties it brings. The questions of rising income inequality, which we see at the very centers, the mega centers of the creative economy. When we looked at the Creative Crescent, people thought it was an incredibly open place, an incredibly diverse place, an incredibly beautiful place. What was their major concern? Housing affordability. How do we provide affordable housing for the, not even all of the population, particularly the young population that needs to find housing and is being priced out? Traffic congestion, income inequality, divergencies between groups. These are all critical issues. Anyway, it is a wonderful instrument and tool we are proposing. We have roughly, Frank and the mayors, this session of 2 hours, a lunch, and then another 2 hours in the afternoon to discuss it. And most importantly, as we go into this phase of finalizing our instruments, getting things down on paper, making sure that we have the kind of tool you can use, we desperately need your comments, your thoughts, and your input. And our promise to you is that by the first of the year, we'll have an instrument ready and raring to go and out in the field and be producing the kinds of results and analysis that you can do and use in your day-to-day decision making. With that, I'd like to bring Frank up to begin to have our conversation here with the mayors.
Thank you, Richard. Let me introduce our panel, and then we'll let each of them tell us more about the fascinating background and details of what's going on in their individual cities. One of the things that we measure in the Soul of the City instrument that Richard's talked so eloquently about is a resident's sense of loyalty to their particular city. And these four mayors we're talking about are from cities whose residents clearly, based on everything we know, express a high degree of loyalty to that city. And each of these four mayors, I think, can take great pride in knowing that their respective cities have scored very high on that particular metric. Let me introduce all four mayors, and then we will come back and begin, first of all, with Mayor O'Malley. We are pleased, as Mayor Williams pointed out a moment ago, to have with us the Mayor of Baltimore, Martin O'Malley. He has been called America's, well, we can applaud, that's very good. Mayor O'Malley has been called America's best young mayor by Esquire magazine, and no matter how old you get, I assume you'll still want to say you were America's best young mayor as you move on in years. He has led Baltimore City's renewal, working tirelessly to make it a safer and cleaner city. Under Mayor O'Malley's leadership and through the hard work of police and neighbors, Baltimore is leading the nation in the rate of reduction of violent crime, and at the same time, Baltimore is freeing its communities of drug use with new substance abuse facilities and improved drug treatment funding. Mayor O'Malley is moving Baltimore government from patronage politics to performance politics, something that speaks a lot to what Richard's saying, and I, of course, like. That's metrics, through the use of his nationally acclaimed CityStat program, with a dedication to open and transparent government and a belief that what gets watched gets done. Mayor O'Malley is tracking performance on a scale unprecedented in local government. Our second mayor with us today is from Omaha, Mayor Mike Fahey. Mayor Fahey. Mayor Fahey is entering his second term as mayor of Omaha, a city which is near and dear to our hearts at Gallup, because our large Gallup University building has risen from the banks of the Missouri River, a little due north of downtown Omaha, in an area that I remember when I would come to Omaha to go to Lincoln and also to do some work in Omaha years ago. You went from the airport to downtown Omaha through, well, less than the most pleasingly aesthetic portion of a city in America today. It's been totally transformed. When one goes from the airport now, Epley Field, to downtown Omaha, one goes through a beautiful, just as Richard was saying, aesthetic corridor now lined with the signs of growth and vitality, including not only, of course, the Gallup University building, but a new convention center and hotels and a variety of other testimonies to how a city, at least in that particular component of the city, has turned itself around, in my opinion, dramatically. Mayor Fahey looks forward to continuing his work to strengthen neighborhoods and parks in Omaha, enhance the professional police and fire departments, build the city to higher design standards through Omaha by design, and to promote that city to new businesses as well as tourism and convention planners. Mayor Fahey was first elected to office in 2001 and sworn in as Omaha's 49th mayor. Following a successful career in the private sector, Mayor Fahey believed his business background could strengthen local government, and to date, it certainly has. Our third mayor on our panel today is Mayor of Denver, Colorado, John Hickenlooper. Mayor Hickenlooper. Mayor Hickenlooper is a small businessman who had never previously before run for political office. He was elected mayor of Denver on June 3rd, 2003. And since taking office, Mayor Hickenlooper passed a citywide charter reform initiative to modernize Denver's personnel system, overcame a $70 million deficit to balance the city budget in that city while averting major cuts in services and massive layoffs in April 2005. That was less than 2 years into his first term. And Time magazine has named Mayor Hickenlooper as one of the top 5 big city mayors in the United States of America. A respected entrepreneur, Mayor Hickenlooper was involved with numerous downtown Denver renovation and development projects and is credited as one of the pioneers that helped revitalize the lower downtown area of Denver's historic district. And finally, our fourth mayor that we have with us today is János Sáför, the deputy mayor of the municipality of Budapest, Hungary. Mayor Sáför. As deputy mayor responsible for cultural affairs in Budapest, Mr. Sáför is responsible for the performance of tasks related to education, public culture, public collections, art, and other cultural activities. He is also responsible for the protection of children and youth, tourism, public relation activities, youth politics, cooperation with the churches, and funds transferred into his competence. He has also been a member of Parliament and a member of the MSZP since the foundation of that party. Now, with that in mind, let's begin with Mayor of Baltimore, Martin O'Malley. He, as it says here, inherited, and I think you'll enlighten us this on the accuracy of this statement, a dispirited city. And one of Mayor O'Malley's first challenges is how to get citizens to believe in their city again, because belief in a city, as we all know, precedes loyalty to a city. With that introduction, Mayor Martin O'Malley.
Thank you. Thank you. Hey, thank you very, very much, and to the Glocal Forum, thank you for the important work that you do. To Tom Hogue, who's pulled all of this together here, thank you, Tom, for your commitment, and also Mayor Williams, who's done a terrific job in the city of Washington, getting Washington to come together and head in the right direction once again. I come from the city of Baltimore, which is north of here. We are the city in the northernmost part of the Creative Crescent that you have heard Mayor Williams and Richard Florida talk about. And that Creative Crescent runs from Baltimore through Washington to Richmond, an area, if it were measured as looking at it as part of the global economy, a real powerhouse of a metro economy. The city that I have had the honor of serving and leading for the last 6 years is the original land of the free and the home of the brave. Whenever any of us have heard at the Olympic Games on those occasions when the United States wins a gold medal, we are the birthplace of the national anthem. We are a city that has been faced with our share of adversity over the years, And probably the moment that brought us our greatest fame in the history of this young nation came in 1814. Washington had been burned to the ground. We had no federal government to back us up whatsoever. And when faced with the most powerful Army and Navy, the British Army and Navy, coming up the Chesapeake Bay, rather than raising a white flag and surrendering, the people of Baltimore dug trenches. We rallied to a fort that we had built with our own dollars, thank you, in our own hands at Fort McHenry, dug trenches with our mayor, 60% of us immigrants, 1 out of 5 of us free black citizens of a still as yet imperfect country. And we carried the day and saved the United States of America and the great idea that we could become. Well, fast forward with me, if you will. The adversity that we faced in 1999 was a foe that Fort McHenry could not keep at bay. And that was the foe of the foreign chemical attacks of cocaine and heroin. Baltimore had become the most addicted city in America, according to the Drug Enforcement Administration, by 1994. We stayed there every single year until 1999, by which time we became one of the most violent cities by all measures that the FBI uses. Needless to say, no one wants to stay in a city that's becoming more unhealthy, more dangerous, or more deadly, and we lost a tremendous amount of our population. But one thing that we had never lost was the character of our people, that resilience, that loyalty and love of place. When the folks at Gallup and Glocal told me that Baltimore had scored high on the loyalty index, that was not a great surprise to me. And it was that love of place and that loyalty that we tapped into with something called the Believe campaign. I wear this not just today, it's on every one of my suits unless they've recently returned from the dry cleaner. It is a civic engagement campaign that we launched about a year into the important work of restoring the foundation of progress that is security back to our city. I think every one of us, regardless of what city we govern in the world or serve in this world, you know, there's a constant struggle that always goes on for greater security, greater opportunity, and a summoning up of individual and shared responsibility for making that better future so. And that's what we tried to do in the course of the Believe campaign. We had identified the big negative culture of failure that was holding us down, that sense that there was nothing we could do about drugs or drug addiction, and the reasons we couldn't, we had 10 excuses, and many of them were based in our low esteem of one another. But we also knew, because of the conversations and with open ears and polling, that people had a tremendous loyalty and a love of place. And what we sought to do in the course of the Believe campaign was to lift out that negative perception by acknowledging it openly and honestly, and then leveraging it away with that raising that share core value of love of place. Well, what did? We bought about $2 million worth of television. We ran ads that portrayed Baltimore as a young African-American boy, about 12 years old, traveling through our city, past the fast lifestyle, the deadly lifestyle, the needles, the wrecked lives selling themselves on corners, addictions everywhere you look. You can't get away from it, the little boy says. He's warming his hands at an open fire next to a presumably addicted person. And he says at the onset of this dark ad in the middle of the winter, he says, "My grandmother says that we're all part of one big fire. I don't know if that's true, but I know that there's a fire within me." Do you want me to turn this on? Okay. I know that there's a fire within me. And then you travel with him as he goes through the wrecked parts of our city. And he points out 2 guys on the corner motioning to him. He says, "Those guys from the county who happen to be white say I'm a drug dealer already, think I'm a drug dealer already. I don't want any part of that." And then as the ad starts to change and the camera goes down a dark street passing a church that says, "Come unto me," the little boy says, "My sister's gone to the store to buy some candy. I wonder what's keeping her." And as the camera moves to a crowd of people and the flashing emergency lights gathered around a corner in our city, you hear the voiceover, the narrator say, "The people of Baltimore are in a fight. It's a fight for their future. It's a fight that in some neighborhoods we've been losing, one life at a time." And then the camera focuses
on the boy's little sister with her beautifully braided hair lying dead on the pavement in a pool of blood, her eyes lifeless but wide open, another innocent victim of the drug wars that claimed from homicide and overdose 6,000 of our citizens over a 10-year period. And as the camera flashes on black faces and white faces, old and young, civilian and police, the announcer says there's some people who say it's over. Give up. We've lost. But for the strong, for the brave, this fight is not over. What will it take to make us stand together and say enough? And then the ad ends as it began, with the little boy still warming his hands by the fire. And he says, look, he's looking straight out at you, the viewer. And he says, please, don't let the fire go out. And then as the music comes up in stark white on black, come the words, believe, believe in yourself, believe in us, Baltimore, believe. And we ran those ads, which were far from the typical civic boosterism campaigns that we see in a lot of American cities. It was more akin to a family intervention. But having acknowledged our problem, we then rallied people to do one thing that would change this current reality. We reminded them of the progress we were making. We asked them to mentor a child. An hour a week can save a life. Get someone you love into drug treatment. There's more of it. It's more widely available. And the third one being join the police department, implicitly support the police department. And we've started to turn things around. The largest reduction in violent crime of any of the top 20 cities in America. We've been able to get our state to increase drug treatment for uninsured people. We're healing people at a faster rate than any other city but Dallas. And we're by no means done. But what we tried to do in the course of that was to identify that greatest of our character assets and use it to leverage individual action to make our part of this world a better place. And we had an 800 number that came up after each of the ads, and those efforts are still going on today. In essence, it was nothing short than summoning up that same character that existed in 1814 and making it work today. Thanks very much.
Thank you very much, Mayor O'Malley, for those words from the city of Baltimore. Our next mayor, Mayor Mike Fahey. Many of us, when we think economically of Omaha, think of Warren Buffett. But I was just, a small aside, reading John McPhee's recent two-part series about railroads in the New Yorker magazine over the last 2 issues, where he talks about the, to me, fascinating goings-ons at America's railroads today, particularly bringing coal out of the coal fields that are in the Wyoming, in that area of our country. A great deal of that moves through Nebraska, and I was surprised to find in reading that article that this enormous NASA-like control center that essentially controlled much of the train work all over America is sitting right here in the city of Omaha. With Union Pacific, we have this tremendous vital economic center sitting in Omaha that I'm sure a lot of Americans are unaware of. By way of saying that, in terms of introduction, the city of Omaha has more Fortune 500 companies than many metropolitan areas twice the size of that city. We will hear from Mayor Fahey about how his city was able to create an environment with a strong job market and highly talented workforce, and how civic policies help promote that outcome. Mayor Fahey.
Thank you. Good morning, everyone. I'm delighted to be here and honored to be here at the Global Forum. I want to thank Tom for your kind invitation to be with you, and Richard, nice to meet you, Frank, and one of my fellow mayors. It's always good to see you guys. Let me begin by trying to tell you a little something about the city of Omaha. Omaha is not as well known as Denver or Baltimore or some of the other cities in the United States. We're the 44th largest city in America. Jim Clifton alluded to it. Nebraska itself is about 1.7 million people. The city of Omaha itself has about 410,000 people. The MSA is a little over 800,000. Which means half of the people in Nebraska virtually live in the city of Omaha or our surrounding areas. So as the city of Omaha goes, so goes the rest of the state, so to speak. So it's very, very incumbent upon us to do a good job of leading, to provide leadership not only for the city of Omaha, but try to help the rest of the state out, because they just don't have the resources to do it. Now, having said that, some of the challenges I think each city up here has faced, certainly since the 2001, was the economy was starting to go the wrong direction. And then, of course, 9/11 hit. There were some very hard choices the city of Omaha had to make, and I'm sure other cities as well. What do you do? What priorities do you grasp onto? What is important to us? We chose, like many cities, public safety. We thought for sure we had to maintain our police and fire departments, our emergency responders. That had to be our first goal. The rest of it, because of the economic downturn, we too were facing shortfalls in our revenue streams. It came up to about $40 million over the next 3 years that we had to make some drastic cuts, or we had to raise taxes. Well, we took the approach that I think most Americans did. We just tightened our belt and hunkered down. Now, having prioritized public safety, we had to make some cuts, and what we did it through attrition. We did not fill a lot of civilian jobs. There's 20% less civilian workers in the city of Omaha today because of those actions. But I have to give those people a lot of credit. They did a Herculean job of stepping up to the plate, cross-training them. The people who work in our Parks Department also plow our snow during the winter months. They fill our potholes as well. They've just done an outstanding job. Having said that, we were probably better off than a lot of cities because of some of the vision that had taken place over the last decade. We had determined that we needed to change the face of our city. And what we did was we invested in our riverfront. We invested over $2 billion in the restructuring of our city along the riverfront and headed into the downtown area. It has a dramatic impact as you come into our city. We're very blessed to have an airport that's only 5 minutes away from the downtown area. It really is very convenient and attractive. It's an attractive segue into the city now, and all of that has changed here in the last 5 years since we've completed the Gallup campus, which is one of our, thank you very much for the investment you made in the Omaha community. The Quest Center, the Convention Center Arena. The arena opened 2 years ago. It's the 7th largest well-attended arena in the world today, just in 2 years. So we've had some great concerts, things that we have not had the privilege of doing. That enhances the quality of life in our city. We were having the same problem that many cities have. We had a lot of our young people leaving our city because we did not have the attractions there. One of the things we looked at as we did our surveys, we need to have a more attractive, a more welcoming community to have the attractions to keep the young people there and to provide economic opportunity. One of the things that was going on, of course, was the construction along the riverfront. Union Pacific, we celebrated last year. We're a very young city. We were 150 years old last year. And the reason we were really started there is because of Union Pacific. That was the beginning of the transcontinental railway system out of Omaha into the West Coast. And a lot of the immigrants who came to our country, into our city, came there because of the jobs on the railroad. We had a large Irish contingent. We had a lot of Eastern Europeans enter into, and now our city is changing even more drastically. To give you a little idea of the makeup of the diversity of our community is this. We have about 12% African Americans, but the newest and largest growing segment is the Latino population. 13% in the city of Omaha are Latinos, and a lot of that has occurred over the last 7 or 8 years. We have 5,000 Sudanese in the city of Omaha. That's unprecedented. We're probably one of the largest gathering of Sudanese in the country, right in Omaha, Nebraska. Now, how do you make these people feel valued? How do you make sure they're welcome into the workplace? We have been working very diligently with the Greater Omaha Chamber of Commerce to make sure we're not only welcoming, but we're trying to provide opportunities for them. We're blessed to have 2 teaching hospitals. We're blessed to have 11 universities, and we have a wonderful public school system in our city. So we have been bringing the kids into the school systems and trying to make sure that they stay in the school system. We, like other cities, are challenged with drug issues. Methamphetamine is one of the issues we have in our city that we deal with continuously, but it is not to the levels of some other areas. One of the things that it was mentioned briefly that I think helps our economy so much is we're a very diverse economy. We're the home of 4 Fortune 500 companies, and they're very diverse. Mutual of Omaha, you've all seen Wild Kingdom, that one there. There's the ConAgra Foods. There's the Union Pacific Railroads, and there's that little unknown company called Berkshire Hathaway, led by Warren Buffett. Those are 4 of our companies that provide a great deal of opportunities for new workers, but also provide the stamina and the diversity to allow us to continue to build our city. One of the best things you can see about a city is when you have those cranes sticking up in the air. I love those new birds, those crane birds. When you see that, you know there's progress being made. One of the happiest things mayors can do, and I think it speaks all over the world too, is to attend a groundbreaking or ribbon cutting because they are signs of progress. You know your community is moving forward. I've had the pleasure to do a lot of those in my 4 years, and I look forward to a lot more of those too. One of the new, I want to end by talking about one new sector of business that is providing a great deal of momentum in our community that we did not have before. We are the home of the Strategic Air Command, STRATCOM. Recently that command has been expanded to include space. So now we find ourselves on the cutting edge of the new defense industries. We have companies who have come to town just in the last 2, 3, 4 years, Boeing, Northrop Grumman, Lockheed Martin, SAIC. These are great opportunities for our kids, and all of a sudden we have a renewed interest in engineering and math in our kids. Our high schools are starting to recognize this opportunity and embracing it because we know if we do this, our kids will stay there because there'll be great jobs for them. I want to just end by thanking you so much for the opportunity to be here with you today. It's hard to get a mayor talking and only give him 5 to 7 minutes, folks. I hope you appreciate that. We're very challenged to do that, but thank you all very much for attending today. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Mayor Fahey. In the case of Denver, Colorado, Mayor John Hickenlooper leads a great city in a beautiful western state with a tremendous and beautiful airport, although unlike Mayor Fahey, I don't think quite 5 minutes from the center of downtown Denver, but certainly a spectacular new DIA airport. Denver, of course, is renowned for its aesthetics and its quality of life, but the mayor has faced the challenge of continuing to move the city to compete with many other western cities that are among, if not the fastest growing in the country, cities like Las Vegas, Phoenix, and Tucson, Seattle, and Portland. How he's faced those challenges is a fascinating story, and we welcome Mayor John Hickenlooper.
That sound comes on loud. Obviously, Richard Florida, Gallup, and Jim Clifton is certainly, I think, a wonderful thing to bring all together in this kind of trying to look at things. They asked me to speak a little bit about leadership, which is a little unlikely because I've never thought of myself as a leader. Wasn't, voted captain of our baseball team or things like that. But I did spend 20 years in the There's probably no better.
I think you might have the battery short.
Is that better? I spent 20 years in the restaurant business, which is certainly a crucible of learning several basic things about direction. Restaurants never have enough money. There are always somebody angry. The soup has been dropped in someone's lap. And it's always an imperative to have a strong team. And when I tried to think of what the 6 most important things I thought of for leadership, they all kind of came out of that experience. One is certainly to surround yourself with the best and the brightest, to find those people that complement each other, and to make sure that group of people are as diverse as they possibly. I think your battery's no better than the other battery.
Five microphones.
Well, you can have all of them. I'm sure. First time I've ever had 3 microphones. So I think that diversity is not just in ethnicity, but that diversity is in age, where people came from, in class. The more different people you have around you, the higher the probability you will get creative ideas. Second is you hire that team, create a vision, and as you're communicating that vision and you're bringing that team together, create a system of accountability. Martin O'Malley was actually one of the people who inspired me to run for mayor. Probably some people in Denver still don't forgive him. But that system of accountability that he created in Baltimore is a wonderful model of how you can begin to create a system, and if you don't hold the people directly under you accountable for specific goals that they have to achieve and then come back to, that needs to go all the way down the food chain. If you don't do it for the people directly under you, they won't do it, and you'll have no system. Third, I think you need to focus on what's important. You can't do everything. Figure out what your city is good at or what your company is good at, but focus on the important things. Again, you've always got to pick up the trash, you've got to fill the potholes, but focus. Fourth, I think collaboration is one of the most under-recognized but most important opportunities that we have, certainly in public life. We, within all of our management team, relentlessly talk about how can one agency help another agency, how can they collaborate, and that's on the internal side. I think part of that collaboration is based on how you train and communicate with people. We always try to never take credit, make sure someone else gets whatever the team has done, make sure the other people get credit, which results in a great deal of praise being given around the team. We also try to make sure that that chain of command is respected. General Douglas MacArthur was famous for advice he received from his father, which was never give an order you think might not be obeyed. Communication, I think, is the fifth, probably most important imperative to successful leadership. It's got to be clear, frequent, and honest. And I think each of those are absolutely important. One of the big advertising firms in New York now is talking about, when they talk about communications, they talk about ROI, not return on investment, but that their message is relevant, it's original, so people will repeat it, and that it's impactful. And I think that's true in whatever you're communicating. Too often, the pressures of public office seem to create situations where leaders don't feel the freedom to be able to admit a mistake. And again, it appears to me, as someone who never was in public office until a couple of years ago, that if from the very beginning someone would stand forward and said, I made a mistake, here's what we should have done, here's what we're going to do to rectify that, I think that problem goes away instead of lingering for weeks in the newspaper and diverting people's attention. Certainly it's important to have credit, but by making sure that you're always giving credit, and that's part of that collaboration, you make sure that people will hear it more clearly. Will Rogers had a great quote where he said, if other people blow your horn, it'll carry a lot further. And that, I want to finish on, in that communication and collaboration, it's very important that cities now begin to find ways to communicate and collaborate with their regions. In other words, that collaboration can't just be on the interior, on your management team, but it also has to extend to your suburbs. And in most cities, the outstate, the rural areas, are also in adversarial relationships with their cities. And again, just like the city and the suburbs, these are completely non-productive and end up creating many lost opportunities. Fifth, I think it's important to recognize self-interest, see the different self-interests. For instance, in suburbs, what can the city do to help that mayor succeed, help the suburbs succeed? And within that, to do that, really, you've got to be able to empathize. You've got to be able to put yourself in that other person's or that other community's shoes and find out exactly how they're looking at things. Oftentimes, what they need from you isn't that significant. If you take the time to find where you do agree, listen actively, try and really hear what they're saying. It's no different often than just a customer who's had a bowl of soup in their lap. Last, I think, be true to yourself. Know what your own natural personality is. I always use a lot of humor because I grew up with thick glasses and very thin, had many challenges as a child. Actually, they had I was described one time as nearsighted and long of limb, which is one of the most polite ways of calling someone a geek that you can have. But that humor has become part of my brand. Maybe that's not a part of everyone's brand, but every person has some aggregation of characteristics that they need to stay true to. And then lastly, I think in leadership you always have to be optimistic. And we learned in the restaurant, if you come in, you've had a bad day, if you let that show, then all of a sudden your bartender, your waiter also are having a bad day, and it permeates through the entire culture of your organization. Even when things aren't going well, you need to have your chin up and you need to have a smile on your face, and you have to be thoroughly optimistic. I told a story when I was running first for office and far behind in the campaign of a public speaking professor at the University of Wyoming who talked all the time about the importance of using opposites. If you talk about the agony, you talk about the ecstasy. If you talk about beauty, you talk about ugliness. He asked his class, what is the opposite of despair? And the student said, joy. He said, of course. If you want people to feel despair, talk about joy in the same sentence. Then he asked, what was the opposite of woe? And a kid way in the back said, giddy up. And it probably doesn't translate too well. But I think the opposite of woe is to giddy up. And I think that oftentimes that willingness to embrace what appears impossible often allows us to achieve it.
Thank you very much, Mayor Hickenlooper. We heard something historic about the city of Baltimore, Francis Scott Key writing the Star-Spangled Banner there. We heard something historic about the city of Omaha, which is where the Transcontinental Railroad started on its westward trek as they started moving eastward from California. We didn't hear anything historic about the city of Denver, but the one I'm reading an biography of Dwight Eisenhower at the moment. So here it is. Just happened to have been reading it. Mamie Eisenhower was from Denver, and I believe Dwight, at least she lived there half the year, and Dwight and Mamie got married in Denver. Did you know that? All right. So there you go, your historical fact that the mayor himself was too modest to bring up. I thought I would bring that up about Denver has many other historic aspects to it, of course, that I'm too naive and ignorant to be able to relate, but maybe we can get to those after the speech for those interested. Speaking of history, the city of Budapest has a tremendous history, of course. They're in its location in Eastern Europe. I wish we had days and days to talk about the fascinating background of Hungary and all the manifestations it's gone through, and Budapest, but we're very delighted to have with us Deputy Mayor János Schiffer, as we talked about earlier. And Mayor Schiffer will talk about how the aesthetics of a city, particularly a major world city like Budapest at the crossroads of so many civilizations there in Eastern Europe, affect that city's culture, economy, and loyalty. Thank you very much. Mayor Schiffer.
Thank you. Köszönöm szépen.
Thank you very much.
Zavarba voltam a felkérés alapján, hogy mennyit kell
I
nekem
was a little bit
Budapestről
confused
beszélni.
when they have asked me originally to talk about Budapest because I didn't know how long I'm going to be speaking.
I give my just on my speak and you can.
Thank you.
Tehát szeretettel köszöntöm Önöket.
Well, I would like to extend my greetings to all of you. I was somewhat confused as to how much I should speak about the history of Budapest when I was asked to talk, but I hope that the name Budapest means something to everybody here. But since my colleagues spoke about the history of their cities as well,
ezért meg fogják bocsátani nekem, hogy én is a város történetével kezdem.
For this reason, I hope you will forgive me that I say a few words about the history of my city.
A városokat összehasonlítjuk, és a városok közötti verseny.
Earlier there was some talk about the comparison of cities, about the rivalry, as it were, between the cities. I would like to say that the most important thing for us is not to compare ourselves with other cities, but also to compare us with the city of Budapest that was 15 years ago. Because 15 years ago we had a change in the political system in Hungary, which enabled Hungary to become a democratic country. We had to face incredible changes when from one day to another we all of a sudden had a drug problem, which was a very slow progress in some other places, if you can call this progress. And all of a sudden, from one day to another, we had to face criminal activities and crime, and we have all of a sudden had an open society from every aspect of the word, political and societal and economic point of view. What answers can we give to these questions? In terms of criminal activity, I can say Budapest has become one of the safest cities in Europe. As far as the drug problem is concerned, unfortunately, I can say that many other mayors of European cities would also say they have a real problem in handling this problem. We had to face challenges such as from one Dayton, we have had a huge increase in registry of automobiles. But I don't want to talk about our problems, but I want to talk about the spirit of the city, but I had to go back to this. Allow me to start with an anecdote, which actually started to spread in the United States right around the time of World War II. According to this anecdote, during the first half of the 20th century, Martians or special people have infiltrated some of the best universities and research institutes of various global institutions, and they spoke lousy English. They spoke with an accent. It wasn't is that they spoke with an accent. They even claimed to be Hungarians. When the world found out that they were not only Hungarians, but they were from Hungary, and they were also from the city of Pest. These Martians were Eugene Wigner, Teller, Dr. Teller, Leo Szilard, and one of the greatest mathematical geniuses, John Newman. Why did they come from from Budapest? They could have chosen New York, London, Paris, which were a lot more modern or richer or luxurious. Why did they come to Budapest? I believe this, perhaps selfishly, is because they like the restaurants, they like the food, they like to sit down and talk with one another in the terraces of cafes and restaurants. In other words, they loved what is actually the soul of a city. And this time, the end of the 19th century, the beginning of the 20th century, was when Budapest lived its golden age. This is when the city has changed forever. It became a world-class city. Its population increased fivefold. It became an important player in the European marketplace regionally. And of course, the environmental area with the Danube River flowing through the middle of the city, combined with the first continental underground railway that was built, and its political and educational centers that have developed, made it a world-class city. 1,900 years ago, this area has become a city. We have amphitheaters, we have Turkish baths, and we have remnants of the Austro-Hungarian monarchy buildings, the secession style buildings, the Bauhaus style architecture, etc. as well. And the fact that the city became the way it became, it really became a melting pot in Europe, where Germans, Serbs, Czechs, Slovaks, Jews, and Christians lived with one another in a relative atmosphere of tolerance. And at that time in Europe, this was a very extraordinary thing. This is the time when the first generation of cosmopolitans have formed in the city of Budapest. This generation was broken by the World War II and the 40 years that followed after it, and everything has slowed down.
The past 15 years, however, brought us back on track to the European and American movements. One of the cultural fields which is under my jurisdiction, was mainly preserved. We could say that today Budapest is one of the cultural centers of Europe. We prepared a program, and I believe that we could have that here for you to see, but unfortunately we cannot do it now. And this is a program, which is for 2010, when Budapest wants to become the cultural city or cultural capital of Europe.
Megteremtse azokat a közösségi helyeket, ahol találkozni lehet megint. Ezek a terek vagy udvarok, ahol beengedi a lakó a másikat, hogy találkozhassanak, eseményeket szervezhessenek. Birtokba akarjuk jobban venni a Dunát, amit
we want to use the possibility of what the Danube River brings us. We don't take advantage of the river. We don't live with the river. This plan of development is concerning the development of both of the banks. We do have two big projects of former industrial regions. One of it is a natural gas factory from the 19th century, which we want to rebuild into a cultural and touristic center. For example, we would like to build a center for the Microsoft Corporation. The other industrial region is a region of storage facilities, which we want to turn into contemporary art galleries for the young people, which would be a sort of incubator kind of workshops where they could gather, where they could meet with their peers and also with the citizens of our city. We want to point out that the city is for its citizens. We have a slogan which would be translated like Budapest is yours as well. And I believe that the cities of future of 70 million are a little bit way too big for us to feel that the city is ours. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Mayor Schiffer. That was a fascinating insight from that fascinating and extremely historic city. Makes us, as we talk about the history of Baltimore from the 1814 and from Omaha after the Civil War when the Transcontinental Railroad began and so forth, that makes us feel rather humble here in the United States when we talk about a city that's 1,000 years old, as we heard from Mayor Schiffer. At this point, we have time left between now and 11:30 to entertain questions from the audience of our four mayors, and I think this is a fascinating time to let people ask questions that's on their mind and to get insights from our mayors that perhaps weren't covered in their initial remarks. Let's see where we might begin. I understand Robert Manchin may have a question from our European office of the mayors. Robert? I don't know if there's going to be a hand microphone. I guess there would need to be, so hold on half a moment. Here they come. If you do have a question, as has become obvious here, someone will bring a microphone so everyone can share in your insights. Robert?
Somebody who lives in Brussels now and looking at cities in Europe, I was extremely pleased on some of the comments Mayor Schiffer made about the history of this global competition between cities and the brain drains between cities. Americans get used to that kind of big drain, but are we still in the same stage across the globe, or is it changing? Europe right now is undergoing a huge change within the 25 countries. And the question is, people who are living in that given city and wants to maximize their well-being, do they really care about this competition, or whether they care about their own well-being locally? Can you really draw people from other continents? Is it really a global competition, or it remains within the continents, where we heard 10% of the American cities are trying to get the best talents out of the 90% are there? Same thing is happening in Europe. When we were looking at the most important cities in Europe who had the highest well-being, at least according to the citizens, they are, interestingly enough, cities that had the highest local pride in their cities. Places like Dublin, places like Helsinki, places like Barcelona. These are usually the places who are very proud of the same way as you were talking about Baltimore. At the same time, they are becoming a global competitor on the global scale. At the same time, some of the citizens are getting second thought about being too open. Look at what's going on in Amsterdam, what's happening in Paris. We really have to rethink of what we are proud of in the citizens' eyes. It's interestingly enough, the same people asked, in every single city, less than 10% were proud how much the city is taking care of the elderly and how much they are taking care of the needy in the given cities. We have a huge discrepancy on a global competition and creating a unified solidarity within the city. And I think this is the biggest challenge right now, whether the world is flat or full with spikes. Everybody is really threatened if we hear in Europe that in India, during one single year, the number of engineers produced are 7 times more than in all Europe together. This is really rethinking the global future for us in cities and how do we deal with competing at the same time, taking care of their own. I don't know if you have any comments on that.
I don't know, Michael?
I'm not sure I got it. Yeah, if I understood the question right, I'm sorry if I didn't understand. Does this eliminate competition between cities? I don't think so. I think you'll still have competitions between cities. One of the things that in my community, where you're always trying to promote economic development and diversity and all these things that help grow and improve the quality of life. Even if we are not successful in attracting a new business to our communities, but they may end up next door in another community, I always celebrate those because in the end it's good for because they'll still be needing jobs, they'll still be using our community to eat and shop in. So even though it may not be close to us necessarily, I mean, it may not be in my city, but it may be very close to me, we celebrate that. That's good for our city, even if it's in another state, which we happen to live on the border, so Council Bluffs, Iowa is right next to us. Even there, we celebrate those. But if I lose a business, maybe to my friends in Denver, you know, I'm not as happy about it. But we don't languish over it. Let's put it that way. Go ahead.
A couple thoughts just in listening to what you said. You know, in our city, we are very focused on advancing the justice agenda. And what is that justice agenda? That justice agenda is an agenda that invests in the talents of all of our people. I don't think that any of us who care about our city should feel that because it's a global economy that we can compete for smart people, and if we have more outdoor cafes or more music, they'll all want to come to our city, and then we're relieved of the important social work of building up the talents of your own people. So we constantly talk about a commitment to the justice agenda because it makes our society fairer, more open, and a place where more people feel invested and feel like they have a hope for that better future and to become creative, if you will, innovative, if you will, part of that rising tide, and that their children's boat will also be lifted by that tide. I think one of the pressures that our whole world's going through is this division between those who, the very wealthy and the poor. And I think that some countries have been better at rushing in and attacking that divide by investing in the talents of their people, and hopefully we'll all figure out ways to do that in our own cities.
And just to follow on that a little bit, I think the issue is it's cheaper to import your talent, the really creative, well-educated people, than to educate them yourself. That's on one hand. The other hand, any business person knows that a customer, a resident you already have, is cheaper to keep than to attract a new one. So in the end, there's a balance. the United States now is dealing with a lot of questions around immigration, largely because of the number of Mexican nationals coming into the country, and that we put at risk our reputation over several hundred years as a place where people from around the world are always welcome, where we embrace people of all backgrounds. At the same time, we have to, as we put that at risk, we're not investing in our own education, so that I think in the end there will be a continued competition to attract the best and the brightest, but within that, your best investment will be to try and create your own within your own community.
Hungarian. Én azt gondolom, hogy mindannyian egy picit mást értettünk a kérdésre.
In my opinion, we have all understood something different by this question, and I would like to perhaps say a few things about it myself. Because in Europe, when this question is posed, it's different, and it's also different in East Central Europe, because we are a lot less socially mobile than many other parts of the world. In other words, people move it's much more difficult for them to move from one part of the country to the other. And we also have a difference in competition, or the concept of competition. Especially the 25 members of the European Union, there is a contest between regions within the European Union, or a competition. And obviously these regions could have as their centers the major cities. For example, we are competing with Prague and Vienna in Budapest. That doesn't mean that we draw people from one another. And it is not even the issue of trying to get tourists from one another or anything like that. In other words, the competition among cities is different everywhere we look. But there is a competition, there's no question about it.
شكرا. من ضمن أهداف هذا التجمع كما قرأت وهو كيف نحقق نحن كمحافظين رضاء سكان المدن التي نحن مسؤولين عليها.
One of the goals of this conference is for us as mayors to realize how can we measure the satisfaction of our citizens.
لكن نحن مثلا وخاصة في مدن العالم الثالث نواجه صعوبة كبيرة في تحقيق هذا الرضا بينما هو مطلوب مننا أن نطبق قوانين وأنظمة على هؤلاء السكان.
But in our cities, especially in developing country cities, it is very hard to strike the balance between having a satisfaction of your citizen while at the same time implementing laws that sometimes are not in the immediate interest of those who are not used to implementing laws among your citizens.
السكان يريدون أن يبنوا يعني في أي مكان ويريدوا أن مثلا يمارسوا التجارة في أي مكان. عندما نأتي نحن لمنعهم أو لإزالة هذه المباني التي بيستحدثوها لا يمكن أن نحقق رضا لهؤلاء السكان لأننا نقف ضد مصالحهم كما يتصورون وهذه مشكلة نواجهها.
In least developed cities, for example, building are not being built up to plans. They are built arbitrarily or where people are selling products wherever they want. And when the local administration tries to implement laws and prevent from building in those places or in selling in those not authorized places, the population sees it as government interfering and not to their interest. They become not satisfied and they feel that the government is basically interfering and not doing the right thing.
السؤال كيف نوفق بين تطبيق القانون وتحقيق الرضا لدى هؤلاء الناس؟
The question is, how do you see the implementation of law while at the same time appeasing or making sure that your citizens are satisfied.
I didn't get it.
Thank you.
The question is, how do you implement law while realizing that its implementation may mean that many of your citizens become dissatisfied, huh? Or stated more positively, how in the implementation and the enforcement of the rule of law can we make the greatest numbers of people realize that it is in their best interest? The reason I kind of laughed was because in my city, we faced a tremendous problem with violent crime and with drug addiction. And also being an American city, a city of black and white people where the majority of our citizens are African American, and the sometimes cruel and brutal history over 400 years in our country with the legacy of slavery, and also the use of law enforcement in the perpetuation of two different classes of citizens based on skin color. There were many who viewed the campaign in 1999 when I was elected as a campaign that promised to crack down on crime. And in one sense, perhaps that was so, but really the larger value that we pulled people together around was the value of justice, the value of fairness, the value that said we are all in this together, and that the value of a life in our poorest neighborhood is no different than the value of a life in our wealthier neighborhood. That the moral value of a safe and loving home environment for children is no less valuable in a poor neighborhood than it is in a wealthy neighborhood, because in our city there is more that unites us than divides us. And one of the big, powerful notions that unites us is the notion that in our city there is no such thing as a spare American. Therefore, while acknowledging our fears of one another based on race and class and place, while acknowledging the tremendous hurt and the wounds that still exist because of that 400-year legacy of slavery and the use of law enforcement in its perpetuation and the perpetuation of its unfortunate aftermaths, that nonetheless we are going to come together around that big notion of justice, that notion that a society of law applied fairly and justly across the board can make our city a safer place for all, and most importantly, safe for the next generation. So rather than people looking at police activity or additional enforcement in poor neighborhoods, they saw the deployment, we have come to see the deployment of additional officers in our poor neighborhoods, which happen to be African American, not as a sign or a symptom of continued discrimination, but rather a sign of new liberation and a sign of a local government that is deploying limited resources to where the greatest potential for progress exists. Stated another way, we deploy our police officers to where they can save the greatest numbers of lives based on recent trends and performance measurement. And by being open and transparent in the means in which we address that, as well as by making a renewed commitment to attacking the corruption within every human organization, which in the case of police forces most often demonstrates itself in terms of discourtesy and brutality. And by being open and transparent about those things, we are able to keep that balance and keep a coalition together across traditional lines of race and class and place that had frustrated that before. Now, how you do that with regard to building codes is probably another lesson, but that's how we did it with regard to public safety.
You know, to that, let me just add that I think one of the keys is to make sure that the rule of law is just. And too often in history we see again and again where laws that have been created are not just. I think that self-criticism is the greatest tool of democracy. I'm not sure who said that, but someone did. And that is we need to continually re-examine and make sure that the laws we're trying to communicate, and again, it's constant communication, it's clear, it's open, it's frequent, but we have to be we have to be pursuing a just law.
Let me build on those two comments and the superb question. First of all, let me assure you that although we have representatives of the United States and Western Europe discussing these situations, important situations, the Soul of the City survey has already been executed in many cities in the developing world and the emerging economies, and the World Poll in Soul of the City will cover all countries in the world, and the largest, perhaps not every city because there's just too many, but certainly the largest and most significant cities, and we will be able to answer that question even better as we pursue this over the coming year. A couple of things we know from the existing work that we had and which Mayor O'Malley, Mayor Hickenlooper just picked up on. It's not so much in the Soul of the City survey that an individual decision by a mayor affects somebody's loyalty or satisfaction or pride in their city. People discount individual decisions. They're looking for a leadership style, which both mayors indicated, that is very inclusive and fair. And where we see that is when they believe their city is headed in the right direction. When they begin to see their city is headed in the right direction, it isn't any specific decision that does that, but it's a leadership style which tends to be inclusive and engaging and valuing of all people, regardless of race, ethnicity, sexual orientation. But the two things, Mayor Schiffer pointed this out in the case of Budapest, and Robbie Manchin's comments were so enlightening. What is enduring in a city is not its current situation or its current ability to support its economy. These two characteristics, in the case of Budapest, was so significant. The soul of the city lies in its history, in its aesthetics, in the value it has for elevating people, great intellectuals, not just great intellectuals, common people to do more than they otherwise could be. The value that city has in its riverfronts, in its waterways, in preserving its buildings, and in the European case, just the preservation of historic structures. And the second one is the value it places on all of its citizens, this question of openness or diversity. These two factors are much more important even than individual leadership, because we looked at the role of individual leadership. It makes a big difference. But the two things that really matter to people is the city's pride in itself, reflected in the protection of its natural environment, the protection of its physical environment, and even as importantly, the city's valuing of each and every citizen's contribution. A city that sees that it is open and tolerant and values the contributions of all citizens has much higher scores on this soul factor than others.
I think we have time for one more. There's several here. Yeah, right back here. Yeah. We have a, well, no, I think she could ask this. Yeah, the woman standing right there, I think, it doesn't maybe we'll have time for the other one.
Thank you. My name is Pamela Ridd, and I'm from the University of Colorado. I just moved to the Denver area, so I'm really happy to see the representation by our mayor here. In talking about quality of life and inclusiveness, I was curious to know what the panel, what cities have been doing in terms of how to include children and youth in the local governance and ideas of their communities. I know that the United States is one of 2 countries that has not ratified the UN Convention on the Rights of the Child, which guarantees the right of young people to participate in the development and creation of their communities. So I'm wondering in particular what the mayors of the US cities are doing to involve young people and to ensure that that participation is not tokenistic. And secondly, what if whether or not this survey that the Gallup has initiated actually surveys the opinions of young people as well, and at what age do they go down to? And that's my question.
I'll start with this. One of the most enjoyable jobs I get to do as a mayor is to go around to the various schools and to engage our young people. And this starts at the kindergarten level up through the high schools into the colleges. we try to talk to them not only about city government and what my job is and how their city is run and the history and things like that, but we also try to encourage them, even at their young age, to get involved in their community. Volunteerism is one thing youth can do right away. You know, on the way home from school, I try to encourage the children. I says, you know, when you're walking by your street and you see a piece of paper on the ground, pick it up, put it in the trash. It improves the quality of life in our city if we have a clean city. If people would act like they do on Sunday when they go to church, synagogue, mass, and notice how people dress up? They act differently. When a city is clean, you're going to have lower crime rates. You're going to have better performances all around it. One of the things that I initiated after coming into office was a mayor's youth commission, where we listen, we bring kids in from every local high school. There's 2 kids serve from each high school on the mayor's commission. And we bring them in there, not to tell them about city government, we do explain it to them, but we're there to listen. There's a reason I believe that God gave us 2 ears and only 1 mouth. You should spend more time listening than talking. And I think it is important to listen to the youth of your community, because unless they feel valued, they're not going to stay. They want a government that is also predictable. I would say that most people like to see predictability in governments. And if you have a government that is listening and then acts upon that information provided, you're going to have, I think, future leaders of a city, the doctors and lawyers and the administrators of a city, who will stick around and help run that city. So those are some of the things that we are doing.
I've found that, like Mayor Fahey, that the best avenue for connecting kids to the city's agenda and making sure that the city's agenda listens to our young people has come through our schools. We have tried a number of things, well-intended local foundations pulling together, you know, the Student Congress and the like, to advocate for greater dollars for rec centers or greater dollars for their own programs. But I found that by making sure that your school system respects and holds elections for student leaders, that there's a better give and take between, you know, the privileges of being a citizen of the city and the responsibilities. And the responsibility the government has to do its part in that equation if the kids are doing the important work of being students. And that's where I have found the greatest and most positive interaction to take place.
And I agree. Again, the schools are the best place to start. I try to go to a school a week. I think the key with your youth commission is to make sure that the kids, it's like any public opportunity for people to donate service, they've got to be able to participate in decisions that haven't already been made, and their decisions have to be actionable. In other words, there have to be consequences to what you're asking them to participate in and the decisions they make. The other thing, I take Mayor O'Malley's Believe concept out in our schools. We're just starting to call it Achieve. He's spawned children with his marketing, but we now are very close to have raised an endowment so that I can walk into every single classroom in every single public school and guarantee those children that money will not be the reason they don't finish college. In other words, we have an endowment, the income from which each year will go to grants to make up any gap in our kids' ability to pay for their college, so that if they have the will and they will work hard enough, they can go to college. And that's, again, to show them that the community, that the school district, that the city government believe in them is probably one of the most valuable things we can do to give them that power.
I would like to separate this issue. On the one hand, take care of our young people and send them to school and pay for their education is one thing. This issue is very important, and in the capital cities budget plays a very important role. But as to how they participate in public administration is another issue. I think in terms of the capital city, we have committees where they can participate or be present, but these are very formal meetings. what the real function or the real role that they can play are in small communities or smaller communities and participating in the local government decision locally. There are such major issues that take place in the capital city that usually do not touch on the young people's lives. But when we're talking about a district or a part of the city, then the participation in those decision-making is absolutely essential and important. Thank you.
Richard may want to comment on this, but just as we finish up now, most surveys are done of the adult population 18 years of age and older, and that's the case with the soul of the city. There's a variety of practical reasons for that. In attempts to interview younger people in the household, it's a whole new layer of logistical effort to get parental permission and a variety of things along those lines. But your point is very well taken, and we do Gallup youth surveys and have done them over the years, and I think the point is well taken that as we measure the cities around the world, to measure the soul of younger people would be extremely important as well. With that said, Tom, we'll turn it back over to you. About on schedule here, Tom.
Thank you very much. Right on schedule. Thank you, Honorable Mayors, Richard. Let me go through a little bit of a logistical dissertation here. We felt that it would be important to take into observation some of the soul of the city of Washington, D.C. So while we have group dinners, etc., each night, for lunch today, we're taking 3 groups to 3 different restaurants, all within about a block or 2 of here, so you get a sense of what's happening in this part of the city, which only a few years ago would never have happened. If you'll look at your credential, you will see in the lower left-hand corner a little colored tab, and if you have a yellow, you will be following me to a restaurant just 1.5 blocks up called Oya, and I'll meet you at the front door. There will be people at the front door with a yellow sign also directing you. If you have a red tag, you're going to Zantania's, which is exactly 1 block up. And if you have a blue tag, you're going to Inda Blue, which is 1 block the other direction. David Kimchi, Ambassador Kimchi, will be your host at one restaurant. Christina Ockert from Paris will be your host at another lunch. I will host the 3rd lunch. Each lunch will have a journalist there, and once we complete the meal, we'll engage in conversation, and then we return back here, be assembled back in the room at around 1:45 to begin Section 2 of Soul of the City, which will also include the World Poll, which I think brings into consideration some of the